Now, if you haven't gathered by now, you probably realize what a huge JCE fan I am. I just think JCE just adds so much usability and productivity to Joomla. My clients love it. It's easy to explain. It's easy to use. And I'm going to show you another feature in JCE that I think is really wonderful and that you ought to definitely think about working with on your websites. I'm going to go into my article manager here for a moment and take a look at the About Us article again. If you take a look at the editor itself, there is a zillion billion buttons here. And this is JCE's default configuration. And by default, JCE shows you every single button that was ever possible to be used in JCE. That's great for those of us who are web developers and we want to have a zillion billion buttons. They're absolutely fabulous. But our clients take a look at all those buttons and just get horribly confused. They would really rather have less buttons and be able to do less formatting. Then they don't feel like, I don't really know Joomla because I don't know every single button that's here on this page. Stripping back the JCE interface so that you can have fewer buttons is a really fabulous thing to do. And I'm going to show you how to do that now in this next video so that you can set up a different interface for your clients that will be straightforward for them to use, that they'll feel like they understand all the buttons, and it'll just make them love Joomla all the more. There's no reason to baffle your clients with all these buttons. They're never going to use them all. So why do you give them to your clients in the first place? Okay, so to get that done, I'm going to go to Components, JCE Administration. And this is where you can configure lots of things as far as JCE goes. It'll tell you where you can go for support, the version that you're running, and so forth. Inside of here, there's a number of places we can go set settings. The global configuration is a spot where we can put in some settings, obviously apply globally. First of all, cleanup HTML is set to no. I think that's a wonderful thing. But if you want to have HTML cleanup turned on, that would mean that JCE would take a look at your code, delete any extraneous tags, make sure all the tags match up, that kind of code cleanup thing. You might have seen this in action in Dreamweaver before. Generally speaking, developers turn that kind of thing off. The format and display area here has to do with, do new lines form new paragraphs, or do they just do page breaks or line breaks, the BR tag? Where is the editor pulling its styles from? From your template CSS file, or have you written a custom CSS file for looking at the formatting of your articles within JCE? Should you be compressing JavaScript and CSS? This is something that's very important to people who do responsive design in particular. They like to compress their CSS and JavaScript for fast transmission. So there's a number of things here you can set inside of global configuration. Inside of the editor profiles, however, you can set up individual profiles for different types of users. So by default, we're running the default profile. In other words, the profile that's in use for all users. So if you wanted to make a new profile, you could simply hit the new button up here on the top, and you could fill in all the information to configure one of these profiles from scratch, and then give it a name and hit the save button. I'm not going to go through the whole process of filling out all of this information because there are a number of screens and this is quite lengthy. But I do want to give you a sense of what can be done here with these editor profiles. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the default item here. And inside of here, you can see what kinds of things you can configure. So the default profile for all users is actually really for all the users except for public and registered. You can add additional user groups or remove user groups from this configuration. You can even specify specific users to be included as part of this. You don't see any users listed here because there's only one user for the site. That's me, the super user. Under features, this is where you can specify which buttons will appear. So there's actually a few extra buttons that JCE has that do not appear inside of the interface, and you could actually add those to the interface if you wanted. But in general, I think you're going to wind up pulling buttons away. So using this interface here, you can specify exactly which buttons you'd like to show and which buttons you'd like to take away. Under the editor parameters, you can specify some information here for the setup. What is the theme for the toolbar? In other words, how does it look? The location of the toolbar, whether it's the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen, how it's aligned, various pieces of information like that. The options are very important in some cases. On occasion, you may need to include JavaScript inside of one of your articles, and JavaScript frequently gets stripped out. You think, well, Joomla may be allowing me to use JavaScript, but it looks like JCE is not. This is where you change that setting. You can set this to allow or not allow JavaScript, allow or not allow CSS and PHP. Keep in mind, anytime you turn any of these things on, you are potentially opening up yourself to some security issues. So you want to be sure that you have people who you trust, who are going to be working with this, who are not going to do bad things to your website, at least intentionally. And of course, unintentionally, they may still do bad things to your website. So you just want to be very careful about using these features and understand that they're turned off by default for a very good reason. You can customize what formatting elements are available on the drop-down. You can customize what kind of styles are available, the font sizes, and all the rest of that. So all of that's customizable here. On the file system, we looked at this briefly earlier. It is possible to change your maximum upload file size here within this interface, and other various settings are located here inside of the editor parameters. The plugin parameters will specify certain buttons that are on the site. Should the Read More button show up on the JCE toolbar or not? Should the Page Break button show up on the JCE toolbar or not? Those are two I'd probably turn off because the buttons that are underneath the window work just fine for that. There's some features here you can specify for the file browser, whether you can enable or disable the ability to, for example, rename folders, that kind of thing. Likewise with images, there's some relevant settings here as well. So you can just click on through these and take a look at all the different ways you can customize and tweak JCE. And as I said, this goes on for quite a while in terms of specifying exactly what you can do with tables or spell checking and so forth. So spend some time clicking through these and taking a look at JCE's functionality. What I would recommend is changing no more than one thing at a time here inside of the configuration, and then take a look at an article and see what your changes have done to impact the configuration of JCE behind the scenes. Over time, what you'll discover is you'll come up with a set of settings that work really well for your clients, and then you can just configure those settings over and over again every time you install JCE on a new site. But it's important to keep the interface inside of Joomla to a minimum. You want your clients to feel like this is an easy program to use, that it's very straightforward, they don't get confused. And by giving your clients too many options, you definitely make them feel like there's something that they're missing and they don't understand what everything is, and they want to understand what everything is. So the best approach, in my view, is to strip back the interface as much as possible and just give clients what they need. Everybody will be happier in the end.